Soul Night Live, number 28. Thank you for dropping by. Today is a special pop-up edition daytime episode. And today we're going to be chatting with the vocalist and guitarist from King Crimson, Jakko Jakszyk. Good afternoon.
How you doing?
Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today. I really appreciate it.
No, that's fine.
Been doing quite a bit of press lately, I imagine, for the new album?
Yeah. Endlessly answering the same question over and over.
A loop of your life story, basically.
Yeah.
Well, you know, all that's old is new again with this audience. So it'll probably feel familiar, but to a lot of people watching, it'll be the first time they've heard it. So
fair enough.
I appreciate your patience. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, Jakko. I really appreciate it. So I was wondering, how have you been spending your days lately during this unusual time?
Well, there's never a shortage of stuff to do, preparing for future releases of various bits and pieces, and I just signed a 3-album deal, so I better start writing again. So and I guess during lockdown it was hanging out with the kids mostly.
Okay.
So,
well, that's an upside to the downside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I've spoken with a lot of musicians. This is a show that I started doing back in March. Just because the Zoom craze seems to be the thing to do lately, and I find it a lot more satisfying than just doing it through email. It's nice to actually, I've been talking about this music for years, so it's a pleasure to talk to many of the folks that have helped create some of it. So, it's been on a roll and it's going well, and I'm really pleased to have you be a guest here. So,
well, thank you very much for asking.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I thought we would talk about the new album, Secrets and Lies, and then we'll go back to the beginning and work our way forward to Crimson.
Okay.
Talk a bit about your gear and such along the way and other things.
All right.
So tell me about the initial inspiration for Secrets and Lies and what inspired the title.
The title was inspired by real life events mostly, I think, and there seemed to be a number of songs on the record that you could apply that phrase to as well. So I was adopted as a child, and I found my real mother in my early 20s. And she was quite a famous singer in Ireland in the 50s, but came to England to further her career, married an American serviceman, and ended up in a place called Bearden, Arkansas.
Wow.
And so I traveled to meet her there, and I had a full sister, 3 half brothers, and as the years have gone by, an awful lot of what my mother told me turned out not to be true, and indeed quite recently I discovered kind of by accident that there was another child that no one seemed to know about. And I never mentioned it, never brought it up to her. And then I was in in fact, the last 2 shows I did with Crimson were in Santiago in Chile. And I was sat in my hotel room and my phone pinged, and it was a message from this guy called Darren, who is my brother. And that was pretty weird because I kind of knew he existed, but he had literally, I think within the previous week of writing to me, had only just found out, had only just gone to, he knew he was adopted, but he went to the local authority, had a kind of a new organization for adult adoptees. So he was given like a dossier of his whole life. And he saw on the dossier that he had 2 half siblings, and he managed to find my sister by going online, but he couldn't find me because my name on my birth certificate is Michael Lee Curran. So he couldn't find him, but he did find an obituary of my mother, which mentioned me as you know, famous singer, famous guitarist kind of thing. At which point he realized, wait a minute, that must be my brother. And as an entertaining aside, he was telling this story to one of his kids, his daughter. And apparently his son-in-law said, wait a minute, your brother's Jakko Jakszyk? And he said, yeah, why? He said, I've just seen King Crimson at the Albert Hall. So there's a kind of weird thing. Anyway, my point being that I then applied for the same kind of dossier, because I never went that route. I found out where my mum was kind of by accident. And when I opened up this dossier, the narrative that my mother had told me didn't relate to the facts as they are written down. So secrets, lies. And then there's a song on the album about a relationship I had 20 odd years ago where my girlfriend was cheating on me, and everybody told me that this was happening, and I refused to believe it. And so that's the subject matter of that song. And there's another song about it. Anyway, there's lots of songs that you can levy that title onto. So it seemed appropriate because it was in my head at the time, because all that stuff happened at the beginning of this year.
So it definitely has a personal angle for you.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But I would say just listening to the album and some of the topics that it relates to could almost tie into world events now as well. There's a lot of lies floating about.
Yeah, there's an element of that. Yeah, that's as you're all too well aware in the country in which you live, Sean.
Yes.
There's a rise worldwide of this kind of populist version of politics, which is rather simplistic, and it paints complicated issues in a black and white manner. And life's not like that. Life's more complicated.
It definitely isn't, and it's a slippery slope when you start going that way.
And you know, it's happened here in England, and I think one of the tracks you're referring to, the one that I sent you the video for, which is called Uncertain Times. You know, the genesis of that particular song was, we had this big referendum here in England about leaving Europe. And it was an incredibly divisive thing. It split families, it split friendships. And again, it was full of kind of half-truths and lies, and this simplistic notion of blaming immigration and, you know, all the classic stuff. And on the day of the actual result, there's this place in West London near Hammersmith Odeon called the Polish Centre. And it's where I took my aging father just before he died, in the last 10 years before he died, because you know, he was Polish, and we went to cultural events there, we went to lunch there, we went to dinner there. So it was a place that I have a nostalgia for, and it was a place that's existed for 50 or 60 years, and was there in part as a tribute to the Poles' contribution to winning the Second World War. So it was with great sadness and no little irony that on the day the result of the referendum was announced, the place was covered in racist graffiti. Wow. And I put a thing up on Facebook. I avoid doing very much personal stuff on Facebook, and I certainly avoid anything to do with politics or religion. But this was a personal thing for me, and I felt like highlighting it. So I posted, you know, about how personal this place was to me and the nostalgia I have for it. I linked it to an article in one of the broadsheet papers here. And thousands of people, you know, wrote in supportively and apologetically, and then people started to share it. So then people outside of your friend group started to see it. And then for 10 days, I got a number of messages that said, "We won, you lost, why don't you F off home?" So that's what inspired me writing that song, really, for lots of reasons. You know, just all the nonsense, and the fact that I was getting racist abuse for being Polish. I'm not Polish. I'm Irish and born in London, and then seeing, you know, people that I knew being abused for no good reason. It was part of the unsettling times in which we live, exacerbated by the virus, of course. So.
Certainly. Well, you know, just reading Facebook, it's a lot like that. You know, anything that's even remotely religious or political, someone will say something that's pro, and before you're done, the comments are a mixture of pro and con. Everybody, and it's almost like this world just reads the headline and assumes that's the facts and doesn't dig any deeper. And it's just
I mean, whenever anyone sends me a link to something, the way that my head works is to my initial thought is, what is this website? Who's responsible for it, and what's their angle?
Yeah, exactly. Do they have an agenda they're trying to?
And then when you read the story, I think, okay, well, look, they're saying this about this person. Let me Google this person, you know, and then suddenly you get a whole different side to everything.
I do that myself. You know, the first thing I do is try to figure out if the site is even credible and what their track record is.
There was a great thing I saw Frank Zappa say when they were asking him about how he brought up his kids and whether he allowed them to watch TV. And he said they can watch anything they like as long as they ask the following questions. Who is that man? Why is he saying what he's saying? And who's paying him to say it? So,
very true. Well, yeah. So yeah, the level of cognitive dissonance is just off the charts lately. And all I can do is just hope for the best. You know, I in everyday life, I run into great people constantly.
Yeah, of course.
You know, the internet has a way of amplifying very vocal minorities, whether it be music fans or people that are talking about, you know, much more lofty issues.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no. Well, I've been subject to that too, of course.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that a bit. You know, I mean, I can imagine that, you know, becoming the front man for a well-established band that has been around for decades is, you're going to have some detractors along the way.
Yeah, to be fair, they are definitely in the minority. But, you know, there is I've described them before as the militant wing of the Adrian Belew fan club. So
yeah, that's pretty much.
And listen, you know, music's subjective. There is no right and wrong. It's not the 100 meters. You know, there's clarity there, right? You're either the fastest guy over 100 meters or you're not.
Right. It's a fact.
No amount of trying to describe the technique and is gonna change the end result. So
yeah.
Listen, it goes with the territory. What are you gonna do? You know?
Yeah. I suppose every front man has their legions of fans that will steadfastly stand by them, and I
completely understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have many of your own as well. So you know, you know.
I don't know about that, but
yeah. So well, I was wondering a bit. Had you worked with Inside Out before, or is this the first album you've done with them?
Well, no, I hadn't, but I'd met Thomas Weber on numerous occasions, and for years he said, if ever you decide to do a solo record, please contact me. And he, throughout the whole thing, he's been incredibly encouraging, because I didn't know if it was a good idea, or you know, does the world really need somebody else's solo record? But
yes.
So it's largely down to him, really, that I made it at all, and there were other people interested in putting it out, but in the end I felt I owed it to him, seeing as he was so encouraging, and so far they've been great. And so yeah, I owe him and my manager David Singleton, who's also Crimson's manager,
sure,
who also, you know, gave me the confidence to do this.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed your last one, Bruce Romantic Glee Club. And that's been about 10 years now, so you know, I think we're all kind of craving something new from you. So thank you for taking the time to do it. You know, I've been a fan for about 20 years now. I guess I first became aware of you through the Schizoid Band.
Oh yeah,
and had the pleasure of seeing you live.
Oh, where was that? Oh, what, in Atlanta?
Yeah, in Atlanta at the Variety Playhouse. Yeah.
Variety Playhouse. Yeah, that was lovely, that gig.
That's one of my favorite small venues.
Yeah, that was very nice. I remember.
Yeah, it's recently been remodeled too, so it's even.
Oh, has it?
Yeah, and it was such a treat to see those songs performed live, because at the time the option of Crimson doing them was not there, you know.
Yeah.
And I think for obvious reasons, you know, just the wrong size ensemble, the wrong instrumentation, the wrong vocalist, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't think it's a secret that I don't. I mean, I'm pretty sure Adrian wasn't very keen on doing any of the older material. They never did. I think they did Larks 2, and they did Talking Drum.
Yeah, Red.
That's it. Red, yeah.
Red. I think maybe Schizoid Man popped up a couple times.
Yeah, they did it. They did it on one tour, I think.
Yeah, pretty rare though to get anything pre-discipline.
Yeah.
You know, and they played Red so much it almost became the Louis of Prague. You know, it's just the obvious number, and it's a wonderful, groundbreaking piece of music. So I never get tired of it. But yeah, that was definitely the obvious oldie, I guess, in the set. So yeah, I just think your voice really suits the likes of Wetton and Lake and Burrell better than probably Adrian's would have. And I find it interesting that you kind of take a different approach to the songs from the 80s. Is it that you just, it's like, it seems like you do a more faithful rendering of what's on the record with the older things, but the 80s stuff, you all seem to take it and kind of go new directions. And I was wondering what the inspiration was.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Adrian's voice is so distinctive and so kind of, and it's very American, you know, and something, when Robert suggested we did Indiscipline, and I thought, well, I can't get away with this. This is like beat poetry, you know, I don't want to do an imitation. That would make it like a tribute act. And so Robert said, why don't I rewrite the lyrics and make them English and colloquial? And there was even a suggestion that I write the lyric about me seeing Crimson when I was a kid and now being in Crimson, you know. And I tried, and I thought, oh, this doesn't work. This feels a bit cheesy. So I just thought, okay, well, look, why don't we treat this, if we treat this as let's say it's a brand new piece, right? And someone's written these lyrics and there's some music there. And I said, well, maybe I could write a melody to the lyric. So I came up with this idea, and I had to work out how that melody would work within that structure. And I think I might have put the guitar down as a guide initially, and then sang along to it. And I think Robert heard it and actually said, I quite like that. I like the scat vibe thing. You know, I was very nervous about doing that at first, but it's become a thing. Actually, it's a different version, and it's something that I can do without feeling it's in any ways kind of ersatz. It has to be me, you know. So when we started doing there's a couple of other pieces from that era we do, and I sing them as me, and that's all I can do, you know.
Like Neurotica is mostly just, they left out the vocal stuff mainly behind it, and then you just sing the chorus, right? Yeah,
we started, all the kind of chattering stuff. Pat started doing this, triggering this stuff through an effect, and it sounded really good. But Robert didn't want to use that because it was off the album. So I said, look, I'll do my own thing. So I recorded myself speaking, again, a very kind of English type stuff. So Pat triggers that, just to give the whole thing a different take, you know.
Yeah, well, I think it works really well. Are there any songs that you feel like just would be off limits, or is pretty much anything on the
No, well, I mean, it's down to Robert, really. I mean, every now and then we lobby for a few. We were going to do, what were we going to do? we were going to do a Book of Saturday because I always loved that as a kid.
That's a beautiful tune.
And we've toyed with that, and then I don't know what happened. You know, sometimes these things get lost in rehearsal, but you know, we've from the beginning, you know, we started off, we rehearsed a lot, and then at each subsequent tour, we kept adding tunes to the repertoire, and the repertoire just got bigger and bigger.
Oh yeah.
So that would include the you know, older things and newer things that we've added as well. So we now have this vast repertoire of about 5 hours worth of music or something. And you know, Robert chooses a different set every night. The beginning of the tour tends to be a lot more random. So sometimes, you know, you some real old nuggets appear early on, and then they kind of go by the wayside. Because I think we did Exiles once, and I thought it sounded great, but that's kind of never appeared again. And we play Fracture on occasion.
Is it the perception that is one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire? True.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult piece for Robert to play, and I think playing it in the new tuning that he established in the 80s makes it even more of a challenge.
I could imagine, yes.
Because that was one of the scary things for me when we first started this. I remember we sat in this very room discussing what the repertoire might be. This is before we rehearsed or played a note. And he said, I thought we would do Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 1. And as a fanboy, I thought, oh, that's amazing. You know, they haven't played that in 30 odd years or something. And I was a big fan of the idea right up until the moment he said, that's quite difficult to play ergonomically in the new tuning, because, you know, notes that were, you know, a tone or a semitone apart across the strings, you know, suddenly, you know,
just the opposite.
And he said, but you play in standard tuning, so you can play those parts. No, I can't. No, I can't play those. Are you mad? So that was a pretty daunting thing to have to learn all those cross-picked things, you know.
But you did it beautifully.
Well, you know, I did my best.
So that's a tune that just pops up occasionally, depending on how frisky Robert's feeling that night.
Do you mean Fracture?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think it's down to how Robert's feeling. You know, he practices it a lot, and I think he has to feel on top of his game. Okay. I think there have been times where it's been in the set, and in the middle of the set, he's decided he can't. You know, and a word of warning to anyone that comes to see us, you know, if they want to hear Fracture, you better not take any pictures, because the minute he sees something going off, he'll think, right, I'm not playing Fracture. Because it disturbs his concentration, you know.
That's understandable. And you give an opportunity to take pictures at the end of the night. You know,
yeah. I think
the lighting doesn't change, so it's not like it's going to look any different, honestly.
No, and it's the recording of it I find the most difficult to understand, you know, because you know, you're in a venue, you're seeing this extraordinary thing, and yet you're looking through this thing. As a father of 2 children, I got very tired of the tyranny of videoing every bloody event, you know. Because although you're physically there, I'm looking through a little viewfinder, and the first time I get to see it is on a blurry video that I made, instead of actually watching it while I was there. So I remember that really affected me. I stopped doing it. I thought, well, you know, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, I think a lot of those children's videos will have their worth in 20 years when you look back, and then you're like, oh, I'm glad I did this. But
yeah, well, my kids won't, because I stopped doing them. Because I wanted to be in the moment, you know. I wanted to be present when these things were happening.
Sure, and it's like you could probably find a much better quality video of the same song on YouTube anyway. So.
Well, yeah, and the other thing, which I know this, Gavin brings this up a lot, and I think it's a very valid point. You know, you're in the middle of performing, and there are moments where you can take chances and experiment and push the boundaries. And Gav will say he's about to do some mad thing he's worked out, and he sees a little red light, and he thinks, and he doesn't do it, and he plays something safe because he thinks, I don't want to screw this up, and then when I get back to the hotel, the bloody thing's on YouTube, you know.
Sure.
So the idea that it doesn't affect us is a nonsense. It does. It affects.
Yeah. Well, it's rather
affect the performance. You know?
Yeah, it's rather unforgiving once it's out there too. You know.
Yeah.
Not. I mean, I think a lot of people would be hard pressed to catch you guys making an error, but there's some. What is it? Robert calls them clams, Crimson-esque.
Clams, yeah, clam chowder.
Well,
clams.
hey, happens to the
Train wrecks.
Have you? I would imagine that doesn't happen very often, but can you think?
Well, there is one that was written about, which was a spectacular cock up.
Was that?
It was in. We were in Red Bank, New Jersey. Is it the Count Basie Theatre? I think.
Yeah.
We were doing a run of shows there, 3 or 4 nights, I think. And on the first night, we were playing Construction of Light, which is a jigsaw puzzle. You know, it's an interlocked jigsaw puzzle.
Oh yes.
And there's a bit quite near the beginning where Tony came in. I don't know if he came in a bar early or even 2 beats early, but whatever it was a complete nightmare. And we all stopped and we thought, where the... Tony, bless him, he thought, oh shit. And he kept going and kept playing this thing in the round. And we were trying to work out, where do we come in? Do we just stop and admit failure? And then eventually he came and played this descending part, which occurs a couple of times, I think. And he's played this and we thought, oh, fantastic. We all know where we are now. And Robert and I thought, we were at the beginning when that part first happens, and the drummers down the front thought, oh, this is where that part comes in later. So what's that expression? We snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. So we thought, fantastic, we're back on track. Oh no, we're not. Half the band's playing one part of the piece. And anyway, it became such a thing, and Robert wrote about it, and eventually they gave it away as a free download, so you could actually hear us completely falling to bits.
Okay, weren't going to charge for that one, right?
No.
Well, that's understandable. Well, considering the complexity of the music you're playing, it's a wonder that was a rare instance of trouble.
Yeah, I don't think we've not had a train wreck as big as that. One thing that does happen with some regularity, we've all done it. Even Gavin, who never makes a mistake, except he does on occasion. And that's the thing of, because the set list changes every night, and because there's a degree of choreography that has to go on in terms of setting up sounds or setting up patches, there is a tendency on occasion to look down the set list and think, oh, that's quite complicated when I have to change it. And you get to the end of the number and you jump a number. I think probably each of us has done that. So when the count comes in and you're going, what? This is a funny old tempo, and that's because they're playing a different song. I think at least we've all done that once, I think. And that's the fear of that's one of the downsides of changing the set every single night.
My friend Dave in the chat room says, King Crimson messing up is better than most bands getting it right.
Well, that's very kind of him. What is it that Robert says? It's not the mistakes, it's what the band does once they've made one.
That's exactly. How do you work your way back from the edge, so to speak? I was wondering about, when you have many tunes at your disposal to play, how do you keep them all fresh in the front of your mind with that set list changing every night? Do you have a rehearsal once you get everything set up in the venue and go over ones that maybe haven't been touched upon as recently?
Well, I think the first thing that happens is that we get the set list sent to us lunchtime on the day of the gig. And some of us think, shit, I haven't played that in ages, how does it go? And so you spend the rest of the afternoon practicing it. And then when we get to sound check, we'll run through it.
Okay, so you basically sound check the songs that maybe haven't been played as often.
Yeah, I think, yes, yeah.
Okay.
On the whole, yeah. Some of them, if we played them a couple of nights before, and haven't played them since, we may not bother, but certainly stuff that we haven't played in a while. And every now and then, Robert will throw in a hand grenade. He said to me, oh, that's right, we were in Canada, 2015 maybe, and he said one day, he said, Jakko, do you know Peace? I said, yeah, of course. He said, I thought that might be, I think that might be a lovely addition to the set. I said, oh, okay. He said, well, look, we'll talk about it at rehearsal. Maybe we can come up with a different arrangement. So we messed about with it, and Bill was playing some keys, and he said, no, I'm not sure. And then the next day he said, actually, Jakko, I think it just will be better with just guitar and vocal, just simple as that. And I said, right, but am I playing the guitar? I said, yeah. Right, so in essence, this new arrangement is just me. He said, yes. He said, but don't worry, we've got 2 more shows in Canada, and then we've got about 3 or 4 days off in Tokyo, and then we've got some rehearsals in Tokyo. So don't worry, we'll do it then. I get to the next gig and it's on the set list. And it was absolutely petrifying because it's just me. Anyway, I managed to get through that. And we get to Japan, and he says, you know what I think would be marvelous? I said, well, what's that? Wouldn't it be marvelous if you could sing the opening verse in Japanese? And I thought, is this all some kind of test, you know? So there was a lovely woman that worked for the promoter who spoke great English. And we went in the corner and we tried to write it in Japanese. And of course, because of the immense differences in the language, you know, the one line of the song in English equated to like kind of 5 lines in Japanese. So we had to abbreviate it. And then I had to learn it phonetically. And sure enough, that's what we did.
I think that's on one of the DVDs that was released.
It is, yeah. And that's the first night I did it.
Oh, wow.
I think at that point he said, why don't you sing the opening verse kind of a cappella? So it's just for God's sake. So, you know, no pressure. Oh, that's right. He said, let's do the first time. I think it'd be a fantastic opening to the whole. So you're walking out, never having done this before, you're walking out in front of 3,000 people. And it's just me. There's 7 or 8 of us on stage. Anyway.
Yeah, no pressure.
It's all part of growing up and being British. So
no pressure. Hey, I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about how the triple drum angle came to be and how much preparation Gavin had to put in. I'm under the impression that the drum section got together months in advance.
Yeah, well,
arrangements.
Yeah, I mean, Robert had this vision in his head. He saw it on stage, and then we all got a phone call about this time of year in 2013, and he said to each of us, I have a lineup in mind, and if anyone says no, I'm not doing it at all. So, and he phoned me up and he said, you know, I'm thinking of reforming King Crimson. Will you be the lead singer and second guitarist? And I said yes. And of course, the first thing I did afterwards was phone Gavin, because you know I've known Gavin for 30 odd years. And Gavin said, he said, yeah, I know. He called me first, so he had to tell me that he was the first person. And yeah, Gavin was the drum meister. He was in charge of this concept, and Gav took it very seriously. And you know, Gav spent ages writing drum pieces and arrangements, and they're intricate. And you know, he would sit there and write them on notation paper. And then he would send the parts to the individual players. He would send recordings of all 3 parts, and then he'd send a recording with your individual part missing, so they could practice at home. He even did video, I think, of how he was playing some of the things and counting them. And then they got together as 3 drummers and rehearsed. And Gavin and I would make demos of the pieces, older pieces. We did this for virtually every tour, so that the drummers in particular would have a band to rehearse with in their own space, because you had to do a lot of homework before you even got to pre-rehearsal. So then there were pre-rehearsal, and then there was all of us together.
Okay. Well, it's quite a sight to behold live, and it's so exciting to have them down front where you can really see what they're doing. It's like a very fresh approach that I can't think of any rock band doing, quite honestly, although you have much more the rock band.
I think part of the idea was this egalitarian aspect. If you put the drums down front, it was trying to change the classic idea of what a rock group is. So instead of the singer being down the front and everybody being kind of back up to him, the singer's at the back. And so the focus then presumably or hopefully goes to whoever is taking the spotlight at that moment, and it can be any one of us. So it's almost like an orchestra, really.
Well, I've likened this lineup to the Crimson Orchestra.
Yeah.
There's a much denser sound with this size of an ensemble, but I think it's well suited to the rather symphonic nature of the early material. I don't think it would have worked with just 4 people. They would have needed to clone themselves just to pull it off. Yeah,
it enables us to cover everything and cover any overdubs, and it enables us to do that.
And one foolish, short-sighted criticism that I read a lot on YouTube is, it took 3 guys to take Bill Bruford's place. And I'm like, no, that's not what's going on here. And
I would say 2 things to that. One, well, I mean, on one level, it's completely not true, because the way that the parts are written, this is like one drummer, with 12 limbs. And things aren't repeated. They're certainly not meant to be. And I had lunch with Bill Bruford last Wednesday. And Bill, Bill thinks Gavin is brilliant. Bill wrote, I don't know if you're aware that the 2 drummer concept on Thrack was based on Gavin's book.
And in a way, it kind of doesn't surprise me that Gavin wound up in the fold eventually.
Well, Robert says Gavin was in the band before Gavin was in the band, because
he knew he was.
And Bill wrote the foreword to that book, and it's a nonsensical thing to say. And
they're just, it's like, you've obviously never seen the show, and they're pushing boundaries just like Crimson always did. And I'm sure that Bill is just as impressed with this approach as anybody else, so, it's quite a sight to behold. Okay, well, I wanted to talk a bit more about the new album.
Yes, good. Me too.
I believe it's coming out on October 23rd. Is that right?
If that's what it says, printed piece of paper, then
I believe that's it, on Inside Out Records.
Yeah.
So, you get it at the usual sources. Their distribution is quite good. They're probably the most high-profile progressive label around at the moment. So.
Yeah, that's because they're part of Sony now. So they have all the Sony machinery, and it's been terribly efficient. And I guess that, one of the reasons I decided to go with them, I could have put this out on my own. I could have put it out through Crimson's labels, but I thought, well, let's give this a go. And and I'm doing all of this stuff that I, as an individual, have no idea whether it's of any benefit or not. There's a new website and all of the social media thing, which it's hard for me to quantify if and how that helps. And I'm not overly keen on making videos, but I thought, if I'm going to make videos, I'm going to try and make really good ones. And I'm very pleased with them all. I've just seen the latest one, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it almost has kind of a watercolor quality to it.
Well, the trouble with Angels was the whole idea was that it would look like a painting. I wanted it to look like an animated painting. But the story behind us trying to make that was a nightmare.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because the guy the animator that's made it is this really talented young guy called Sam Chigini. And I'd worked with him before, and I thought he was brilliant and a lovely man. The trouble with Sam is that he lives and works in Tehran.
Wow.
And So when we first started discussing this, and we were discussing the approach, you know, there was a couple of reference points, one of which was a movie from the 80s by Wim Wenders called Wings of Desire. And so we were discussing that and the budget, etc. And then Sam seemed to disappear, and I kept writing emails, and he didn't reply. And I thought, what's happened? And then I got a phone call from someone who said, hi, I'm a friend of Sam's. He's asked me to call you and apologizes for not returning any of your emails. But Donald Trump unilaterally removed himself from the Iranian nuclear agreement and increased the sanctions on Iran. And this is now starting to have an effect on normal Iranians trying to live their lives. And there's been some protests on the street. And as a result, the Iranian government have turned the internet off.
Oh,
so there was no internet. And so then Sam called me and said, I need to film you in green screen in order to turn you into animation. Can you write a letter, an official letter, so I can get a visa to come to England? I said, of course. So I wrote this letter, and of course I had to put it in an envelope with a stamp instead of attaching it to an email. And then again, I didn't hear anything for ages. And then on Christmas Day, I got an email from him saying the internet's been turned back on again. And he said, but we are not allowed to travel to America or the UK. So can we film this somewhere else? He said, I can get a visa to film it in the Netherlands, or if you're prepared to travel, we can film it in Turkey, because I don't need a visa to go there. So I found a green screen studio in Istanbul, and I booked a hotel and I booked some flights. And then 24 hours later, Donald Trump sanctioned the assassination of General Soleimani, this Iranian foreign minister who was in Iraq. And as a result of that, the English government put out a warning about places not to travel to. And bits of Turkey were on that list. And I thought, oh, is this a good idea? I'm not sure it's a good idea. The following day, the Iranians exacted some revenge and blew up a US base, I think. But they also accidentally blew a passenger jet out of the sky. And the following day, Sam phoned me and said they've cancelled all flights leaving Tehran. So in the end, we filmed it in a little green screen studio in London. And I had my iPhone on Skype, and the phone was clamped to the camera facing the monitor. And Toby Amis, who's the guy that's been making this King Crimson documentary, very kindly came along and acted as cameraman. And he had Bluetooth headphones on and was talking to Sam in Tehran. And he was directing us whilst looking through my iPhone. So that's how we made it. And then, of course, after that, he was trying to do these other shots. There's some crowd shots in it, and there's a shot of a girl. And he was going to do all that in Iran, but then the virus kicked in. So he had to do those remotely too. And I think he did the crowd stuff again in Turkey, and the girl was in Holland somewhere. So yeah, it was amazing we made the damn thing at all, really. It was really elaborate.
Triumph against the odds, definitely.
Yeah.
When did you start the album, and when did you finish it? Was it done before COVID came along, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of tracks I just started because I was just writing. There was some tracks that I'd written for Crimson. So Robert and I would get together. Robert would give me ideas, or we would sit here where I live. Steve Wilson, you know him, right?
Sure.
Steve's just moved, but
he probably needs a bigger house, doesn't he?
Well, no, he had a very big house just up the road here. So we lived about 5 minutes away, so from each other. So Robert would come down, spend a day with Steve, listening to what he'd done on some of the remixes, and then he would come here and spend a couple of days, and would teach me new interlocking parts he'd come up with, or new riffs or ideas or chord things, and I would record everything, always to a click, and then I would assemble some of them and come up with a new thing. and then I would take them to Robert, and then we would take them into the rehearsal room and flesh them out. But every now and then I'd take a tune that I'd either written that way or I'd written completely from scratch. And we had this bit of an in-joke where Robert would say, "I love this. Well, this is a fantastic song. Brilliant. An ideal tune for your next solo record," which was code for "we're not doing this with Crimson." You know?
Right.
So 3 of those songs are on this.
Well, I was going to say, I think I know the 3 you're talking about, because they have the more dissonant, skronky approach to harmony that's
okay.
A Crimson hallmark, I would say. Especially was the last tune, Separation, one of those by chance?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And of course, by the time we did that, you know, we were all working together. So, you know, I got Tony to play on it, I got Mel to play on it, and of course I've got Gavin to play on it, and Robert plays on it. And this. So yeah, that probably sounds, of all of them, that's the one that sounds the most. I mean, the thing is, had Robert decided to do any of those tunes, and 2 of the others he did toy with, and we just kind of never got round to it. But had we done that, then they would have gone in a different direction. Had they ended up in the rehearsal room under Robert's tutelage, they wouldn't sound like they sound now, you know, because I have been left to my own devices and done what I do to them. So yeah, they're not really that, you know, the basic tune was written for Crimson, but they've ended up being my version of those tunes.
Okay, I can see that, but I do believe they kind of offer a tantalizing glimpse at what modern Crimson could be.
Yeah.
A new album materializes. But am I right that the whole idea of an album is a little passé these days? And
well, it's not passé. It's logistics, I guess. You know, historically, you toured to promote an album. You don't do that anymore. In fact, it's kind of the other way around. You tour to earn a living, and the album, if there is one, is almost a memento of that tour. It's completely turned the other way around because of, you know, how technology and streaming has completely destroyed the value of record sales being a way of earning a living. That kind of makes it very difficult. Sure. So yes, I mean, you know, there are ways that we could do an album, but you know, who knows? I mean, we've definitely got enough material for an album.
Yeah, I was going to say, you could almost put your own together if you had all the live releases.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, although it'd be nice if you all put it together and
well, of course, on the one hand, now would be the ideal time because we can't tour, but of course, but for that same reason, we can't all get in a room together because the American contingent can't fly out here.
Right.
So who knows?
Well, yeah, I know that's one that a lot of people have wondered about for a few years. You know, will there be another Crimson album? And it's like, well, maybe, I guess.
Well, David Singleton's very fond of saying there are no plans to record a new album, but there are no plans not to. So that's his way out of it. Okay. I think it's been discussed, and you know, it's
not a priority.
These things are not. They're not in anybody's hands other than Robert. You know.
Sure.
And you know, Robert will. You know, he does change his mind. So who knows?
Certainly. Well, I think this album would be a great one to tide fans over in the meantime. While it's not purely a Crimson album, obviously it has a lot of the Crimson DNA, enough to satisfy the appetite of a lot of Crimson fans, I would think. But it's also, you know, it goes many other places stylistically too. And I think that's kind of the exciting part about it, that you know, there's a lot of light and shade. It isn't all just one thing by any means. Yeah, tell us a little bit about the upcoming video for Uncertain Times. I thought that bore the Crimson stamp a bit, and I think fans will notice that when they hear it.
Yeah, well, that was a song I wrote that Robert decided to call one of the tours Uncertain Times. So I thought, okay, I'll write a song called Uncertain Times. So I used his title, And as I say, I explained the lyric, which is, you know, is about this the divisiveness of politics across the world that was inspired by this thing that happened to me. And then the end section I co-wrote with Gavin. He came up with this other thing at the end. And yeah, and I presented that, and I at one point Robert seemed quite keen to do it. But there you go. So then I was left to my own devices. So yeah, there's still some Crimson in it, definitely. But I've done some things that I don't think Robert would have done. And the video, yes, the video's amazing. I think it features. You probably don't know who he is, but you know, there's a guy, you've seen it, right? So there's another guy in the video.
Yeah, you see the back of his head first.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
He's quite famous in England. He's a comedian called Al Murray. An incredibly bright man, very clever, history degree at Oxford. He's the great-great-grandson of William Makepeace Thackeray, who wrote Vanity Fair. But he's a very funny comedian, and his comedy is in the guise of a character called the pub landlord, who's kind of bigoted and kind of so, and it works really well in the video. Although it was a complete accident, really. We had to make another video. We decided on doing that tune. I had a quick chat with Sam, and I said, "Look, we haven't got much time because coming out of lockdown in England, all the green screen studios were closed, and when they opened, you couldn't get in anywhere because suddenly, actually, green screen was a brilliant way of filming.
Oh yeah.
In a lockdown situation, right? Because you're superimposing stuff in the back. So I managed to squeeze an afternoon out of this place in London. Very kindly let us go in there. And Al lives quite near the studio, so we were talking on the phone before, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm at this thing tomorrow. If you fancy popping down for a cup of tea." And he said, "Oh, any excuse to get out of the house." I said, "Well, you can mime a verse if you want." He said, "Yeah, I'll do whatever you like." So I wrote to Sam that night and said, "Look, this famous English actor and comedian is going to come down." And the next morning when I woke up, Sam had A, written a script, and B, come up with this demo where he found footage of Al online, and I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. And then, yeah, so this week, it was only this week we got the final version, and it's fantastic. He's done. Do you know who Banksy is? Is he well known in America?
Doesn't ring any bells.
He's kind of mysterious painter,
okay.
And he does these kind of. It's like really high-end graffiti art, but he's very famous in England, and his paintings go for millions. So he's done me as an animated Banksy. So you see me on walls, and there's a bit at the end where I'm playing. I'm being projected onto Big Ben in Parliament Square. And, it's amazing. I'm really pleased with it. And there's lots of clips of Boris and Trump and various other right-wing English.
Uncertain times indeed. When do you think that video is going to go public?
That'll come out in October. There's another one in between times, which is a much simpler thing, which is just a performance thing, really. Mm-hmm. And that's a song called It Will All Make Sense, which is the one about being cheated on.
First one on side two.
Yeah. So that video is basically me in a pub getting drunk.
Okay.
That required a great deal of research, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yes. Okay, well, yeah, I'm really excited. I think the fans are really going to love this. And, anybody that likes Crimson, I think there will be plenty to enjoy. But, there's more than that going on. The Rotters Club is closing down. This is a dedication to Pip Pyle, correct?
Yeah.
Your love of the Canterbury scene is pretty well documented. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about just what it was about that music that drew you to it. And, all these years later, you're friends with a number of different luminaries from it.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. There was something about the Canterbury thing that was whimsical and quintessentially English, I think. That's part of what drew me to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Robert Wyatt, who I thought was brilliant, Soft Machine. I was particularly taken, I remember there was I was in a youth theatre in Watford here, near here, and there was a guy who was a student, a few years older than me, and was desperate to educate me musically, and he gave me a number of albums to take away and absorb over a weekend. And one of those albums was Soft Machine 2, which I loved.
I do too.
It's really whimsical and surreal and nonsensical in a good way.
I sometimes wish it had a slightly better mix, but
yeah. Well, it was made in '67 or something.
A long time ago.
And the other album he lent me was In the Land of Grey and Pink.
Oh, okay.
And I loved Richard Sinclair's voice. And as a child, quite early on, there were a number of singers that really stood out. There was a guy, I don't know if you know him, there's a guy called Matt Monro, who's kind of an English crooner. He sang the theme tune to Russia with Love, I think, and also Born Free.
Oh, great.
And he sang with an English accent. So I remember hearing Anthony Newley as well. And I thought, yeah. And actually Bowie did it quite often, sang with an English accent. So I was very drawn to that too. And I was a big fan of Hatfield and the North. And I had a band in the mid to late 70s, called 64 Spoons. And we used to go on stage to Also Sprach Zarathustra, a recording made by a group called the Portsmouth Symphonia. Do you know who they are?
I've heard of them, but I haven't heard them.
Well, it was something Brian Eno got together, and in essence, it was either amateur musicians or professional classical musicians. But if they were professional, they had to either play an instrument they don't normally play, or they had to play left-handed, or they had to play, So consequently, it's like appallingly played. So Also Sprach Zarathustra, played by these people, is hilarious. And we used to walk onto that. That was our little intro. And we went to see National Health
wonderful.
At the Queen Elizabeth Hall. And that's what they walked onto as well. And I thought, oh, this is kismet. And there was a girl at the youth theatre who just joined. And she told us that her cousin was going out with Dave Stewart. And nobody else at the youth theatre knew who Dave Stewart was, but me and my mate knew exactly who he was. So we went to the concert, and because she was there, we got to go backstage afterwards. And I gave Dave Stewart a cassette of my band, naively thinking that somehow a support slot to National Health was the road to great riches. How foolish of me! But he was terribly sweet and got in touch. And I remember he was working with Bruford, and Bill and Dave came to see my band live. And then he asked me to come and rehearse. So I remember rehearsing. They had a rehearsal space. This is Bruford. They had a rehearsal space in Camberwell in London. And I remember rehearsing with Dave and Bill. And then Bill got called. This must have been Discipline. He got called back to do Crimson, and the Bruford thing finished. And Dave wanted to carry on playing. So he formed this band with Pit Pile on drums and me and a guy called Rick on bass. Next thing I know, I'm touring Europe, and we're doing new things. We're doing things that Dave's written, stuff that Pip's written, stuff that I've written, but we're also doing some Hatfield and the North tunes as well. So I get to be I get to work with my childhood heroes playing that music. So that was it happened in Crimson, but it also happened there. And so we used to do Share It. We used to do Fitter Stoke Takes a Bath. A couple of Hatfields things. Yeah. So I got to know Pip really well, and Pip was an old English expression we have called he was an incorrigible rogue, which meant he behaved pretty badly at times, but he did it with such charm. He seemed to get away with it all the time, and he was very good at persuading you to do something you didn't want to do. He'd call you up in the middle of the night and say, "You couldn't give us a lift," and you go, "No, why would I do that?" "Oh, mate," and he'd go, and next thing you know, you're in the car driving to, So he had a real charm about him, but he was also a brilliant writer. He didn't just play the drums. He'd play these beautiful chords and write these melodies, which he couldn't really sing. He didn't have a singing voice at all. and some of that stuff was very challenging to sing. And we did live. We used to do this song called Seven Sisters by him, which is an amazing thing to try and sing. And when he made a solo record, I sang most of the lead vocals on that.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the record now. Seven something. Terrible, I've forgotten it. Anyway, Pip died as he lived, really. He went on a mad bender after a Hatfields gig, and he ended up with a woman he shouldn't have been with at the Gare du Nord in Paris, and I think his heart gave out. I think it was a combination of chemicals and his heart.
That reminds me of John Entwistle, except he was in Vegas.
Yeah. Pip was in Paris, and we went to the funeral, and the funeral was genuinely one of the most extraordinary things I've ever been to. He's got loads of kids, and they're lovely and exude such love and warmth. It was really brilliant. And you know how you see flight cases or guitar cases with old backstage passes on and you know display up and all those kind of stickers, right? Well, that's what his coffin had on it when it was brought in.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. And there were certain speakers that were scheduled to speak, but they also had this open floor policy where they said, does anyone else want to come up and say anything? So some people would just wander up, and it was really lovely. And there was the wake afterwards at the cricket club, and Richard Sinclair was singing God's Song. I remember he came over and put the mic to me, so there was a bit of me and him singing God's Song. And in the car on the way home, I gave a lift back to London to John Greaves, Peter Blegvad, and a novelist called Jonathan Coe. Do you know all those people?
I know the names.
Okay, well, John Greaves was the bass player in Henry Cow.
Right.
And was also the bass player in National Health. Peter Blegvad was in Henry Cow. He was also in a band called Slap Happy, and made a number. And he's an American living in England, and he's a bit of a genius, I think. He's brilliant. And Jonathan Coe's this award-winning novelist, whose most successful novel was called The Rotters Club.
Sure.
And the band appear in the novel, and he utilizes that title. Anyway, so we're driving back to London after this extraordinary funeral, and there's all these anecdotes about Pip, and the lyrics started forming in my head. And when I got home, I wrote a lot of them down, and then I set them to music hopefully in a kind of Canterbury-esque style. That's what that tune's meant to be like. And yeah, and it mentions a lot of those things.
You quote a few lyrics, you know, tadpoles are screaming in my ears.
Well, yes, I quote that at the end, because the idea was, you know, the Rotters Club was also a thing. It was a thing Pip had with his mates when he was younger, where they would do not very nice things to people, you know, throw water over them. And so he actually had a thing called the Rotters Club. So was a rotter like these kind of unsurly young characters? Yeah, kind of. But yeah, the rotter was a kind of English thing for people doing bad people, not very nice people. So that was the idea. The Rotters Club is closing down, you know, because it was Pip. So so it was meant to be a lament for Pip.
Okay. And, rest in peace.
And a million anecdotes, you know.
Yes. Moving to a slightly different subject, PRS. I recall you playing PRS at least 20 years ago now. And then eventually, no, take it back. You were playing Parker when I saw you back in. Oh,
okay. Yes, I used to Parker Fly.
Yeah. And how did you move to Paul Reed Smith, and how did the Crimson guitar come to be?
Well,
I should tell my readers that my viewers that I don't know if you've seen it, but Jakko has a Paul Reed Smith with the artwork from the first King Crimson album.
It's in here somewhere. Let me grab it.
Alrighty, yeah, and it's beautiful and very unique. Okay, this is the one, and then there came more of a production model.
Yeah, no, this is my one. So this is the high-end one with the carved maple top, the ebony fingerboard with these beautiful iridescent inlays. That was their idea. But also on the back, no one sees this because it's up against my my body, but there's another detail there from the inside of the gatefold.
Yeah.
And well, I was playing. I had a Paul Reed Smith, and I didn't think it was a. Robert doesn't like Parker flies. He thinks they look horrible. So, and it was probably not a good idea for me to be playing one either, because I know Adrian had a signature model. So the people at PRS, Paul Reed Smith, they said, well, look, we'll build you a special guitar for this, for your new gig. You know, what would you like? And I thought, well, it might look cool if we could have the cover of the first album on it. So it was, it's built to my spec with that, and they very kindly built it. And then throughout, you know, we do this, the Royal Package thing, you know, where we talk to the audience before a show. And the idea of, you know, will that ever be commercially available? And we discussed that, and they decided, well, look, let's do a kind of a more affordable version. So have I got one of those?
Yeah.
I've got one of those here too.
Yeah.
Is this all right? This is quite visual, isn't it, me moving around? Oh, no, I can't find it. I don't know whether... Oh, there it is.
Yeah, and it's...
So many guitars. So, yeah, so this was the production model, which is slightly different. But it's still got the image on it.
Do you find yourself playing that one quite a bit, too?
I play all of them, actually. And, I mean, on the album, I kind of went out of my way to experiment with different tones and different guitars. And, to, you know, rather than it all be... every time a guitar comes in, it's got the same sound. So
sure.
I did spend a lot of time trying to do that.
Well, it's beautiful. I'm wondering if maybe a Lark's Tongue one might be coming up next, because I think that would be beautiful.
We did one. They made me a Cyclops one for, you know, with the one eye, but I don't know where that is. It'll be in here somewhere.
Okay, yeah, that was on the drum heads for a while there.
Yeah. So, yeah.
What kind of amplification are you using on stage with Crimson?
Well, now here's the thing. You see, because there are 3 drummers down the front, we can't use anything normal or approaching standard guitar amplification or bass amplification. Because if we had any cabs on stage, the first thing it would hit would be 3 sets of overheads. So it would be impossible.
Oh, yeah.
So there is no sound on stage.
It's all in-ear monitors?
It's all in-ear monitors. Tony uses Kemper modeling amps. He's got 3, I think, because he uses one for the bass, and then he uses 2 for the stick, because they're, you know, the high part and the low part.
Right.
And I was using Kemper, but I'm now using a thing called a Helix, which is great. It's made by Line 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the joys of that, I mean, this is dull to anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about, but because I've got a piezo pickup in the bridge of my guitar.
Yeah, for those kind of acoustic tones.
Yeah. And the great thing about the Helix is that it's got 2 separate inputs that you can treat individually but save as a patch.
Oh.
So I can dial some of that in, but also dial some of the normal guitar to give it a bit of warmth. So you get this kind of high-end presence on some of the sounds. So
hey, I believe Steve Howe is a Helix user now as well.
Ah, is he?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Using Line 6 for about 10 years, like every version that's come down the pike he's used. But his tech, Andre, is a good friend of mine, and we were chatting about
I know Andre, yeah.
Yeah, and he was mentioning that they've come out with a powered cab that you can just plug the Helix right into. And he said, as soon as Steve tried it, he just played like 1 chord, and he was like, wow, you know, like this sounds amazing. So I think the Helix is maybe the finest version yet. So,
well, you know, these things they're all subjective, you know. And
did it take a long time to set up all the sounds in it for your?
Well, I think one of the advantages of the Helix is that it's really easy to program. You know, it's you can see it in front of you. You can move stuff around. Whereas the Kemper, I don't know about now because I haven't used the Kemper live for a while, but the effect side of it was really complicated, and you kind of got lost because you had to press something twice to go into another bit. You know, whereas this is idiot proof, which is just as well, because
it's all on the floor. It's just like a pedal board, right? There's no.
Yeah. And I needed something simple, really, to operate, because playing the notes is hard enough without having to.
How many sounds do you think you use during the course of a Crimson show?
Oh, I don't know. I've got about 32 banks.
Do you have a different bank for every song, or?
Yeah, near enough.
Okay.
Near enough. Yeah, near enough. Some sounds are repeated, obviously. It's funny. The whole modeling thing is extraordinary. You know, where you get an amp, and especially on the Kemper, you model this amp, and suddenly the amp is inside the Kemper. And when we first started rehearsing, we were playing. We were rehearsing Sailor's Tale.
Oh, love it.
And of course, on the album, there's Robert does this overdub, this harmony overdub, and at the end of rehearsal, Robert said, "That's very authentic, that sound. What is it?" I said, "It's a preset on the Kemper called Early Fripp."
Okay, well, they were darn close. If he thought it sounded good,
yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, that's very interesting. Another question. I saw you in the Proclamation video for John, and I was wondering when you first heard them, and you know, what you thought of their music, and if you ever saw them live, and you just
well, I was. I mean, I'm on that video because Derek asked me to be on it, and he said he was meant to come and see us at Radio City Music Hall last year, and yeah, I think someone played me Octopus. That would have been the first album, and I was smitten by it. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was really original. It didn't sound like anyone else. And yeah, I think I may have seen them live at least half a dozen times, I think, back in the day. Yeah.
I adore them. I had the pleasure of chatting with Derek a few weeks ago, and it was
well, I know Ray quite well, because Ray now does authoring. So Ray does this thing where he transfers all the mixes, 5/1 mixes, and puts them in place on Blu-rays and DVDs, and does all the little menus and the animations and stuff. And so most of the remix work that I've done goes to Ray. So we talk a lot, and it's just an excuse to call him up and have a chat, to be honest. Because he's great company, and a lovely bloke, and yet another childhood hero. I mean, that's yet again, it's, you know, all of these records I listen to, and I know virtually, or have worked with virtually all of those people. It's extraordinary.
Oh yeah, well, a dream come true. Did you ever, in your mind, imagine yourself friending Crimson?
No, that's just mad. That's mad.
You think? Yeah, you know.
Why would that happen? That's bonkers. Don't be ridiculous.
No, I mean, but it did. And that's
yeah, it did. Yeah, it's absolutely insane.
And I just, you were the perfect choice. You know, you're a bit of a shoe-in at that point, I think.
Somebody said to me that I was uniquely qualified to do one job, and bizarrely that one job came up. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I was, at that point, we'd done, I mean, initially, the contact with Robert was, well, it goes back to the Schizoid Band. The reason I'm in the Schizoid Band, was in the mid-'80s, I'd written some songs that were quite successful commercially. And publishers like to put you together with other people that have written songs that have been commercially successful. That, invariably, that's a nightmare, and it doesn't work. But publishers seem to think that might. And they gave me a list of potential collaborators. And I chose two out of that list. One of whom was Pete Sinfield, because he'd become very successful as a lyricist. He'd worked with Diana Ross and what's her name? The very famous French-Canadian singer.
Celine Dion.
Celine Dion.
Just the thought of him working with those two is kind of boggles the mind.
It's bizarre, isn't it? But he did. So I got to know Peter, and I think we wrote one song. Most of the time we just hung out because he was enormously good company, great bon vivant, you know, and liked a long lunch. And then in '97, he phoned me up and said, oh, Crimson are doing a launch of these live recordings from '69 called Epitaph. He said, would you like to come to the launch as my guest? And I went, yeah. So I went to the Intercontinental Hotel, and there they all were. And at the time, Robert was considering doing a kind of short tour, maybe a DVD with the original lineup.
Oh, yeah.
But it didn't, you know, that fell to bits, I think, to do with Greg and his management, I don't know. But the idea of older Crimson members playing the older material remained a thing. And then Pete kind of took charge of it and said, look, I know a guy that can sing this stuff and play Robert's parts. So that's how I ended up doing it. And then one morning, I'd never spoken to Robert Fripp in my life, you know. And one morning the phone rang and it was Robert Fripp. I was completely freaked out. And he said, Jakko, it's Robert Fripp here. I understand you've been rehearsing with certain characters. And I said, yeah. He said, how's it going? I said, if I'm honest, Robert, it's been 3 of the most unpleasant weeks of my life as a musician. And he laughed and said, yes, I thought that might be the case. And from then on, he became my own kind of personal Samaritan. You know, so we would talk. And then when it finished, I can't remember the exact order of this, but I asked Robert if he would play on my solo record, the Bruce Romantic Glee Club, which he did, and we ended up co-writing a tune on that. And then we co-wrote a song called Forgiving.
Okay.
And he played on another tune called When We Go Home. And then Ian Wallace died tragically, and his widow asked me to sing at the memorial. So I sang Islands, accompanied by Mel Collins. And Robert was in the front row, and he was very impressed and invited me around to his house for lunch. So I went and had lunch, and I kind of got the impression he was sounding me out. I mean, Robert's rarely direct, so you have to kind of guess what was happening. And but then they did, that must have been 2006 or 7, because then they did another tour with Gavin, because he asked me a lot about Gavin on that trip. And then years later, I mentioned it to Robert. I said, I got the impression you were going to ask me to join Crimson. He said, I was. So, but he decided, no, we'll try once again with Adrian. And then I got a call out of the blue from him saying, would I like to go down and improvise with him? And so I spent a day recording with him. And at the end of the day, he gave me this hard drive. And I said, what's this? He said, it's what we did today. And I went, right, what do you want me to do with it? He said, I'm sure you'll think of something. And that eventually became A Scarcity of Miracles, which also has Mel and Gavin and Tony. So that became, you know, the core lineup of the current band. But at the time after it came out, Robert made a public announcement that he was retiring from the music industry. So in a way, because I'd also been mixing thrack and as well, so I was kind of within the circle, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think the shock was nobody expected Crimson to come back ever.
Right, and wasn't he trying to launch it without him as something called Crimson DNA with Wetton?
That's right. Yeah. Well, the other part of the story is Steve Hackett, who again, you know, is another childhood hero. I saw Genesis probably more times. The Pete Gabriel version of Genesis, I think I saw more times than any other band. And Steve asked me if I would sing on his Regenesis album. And then David Singleton was in Japan negotiating some stuff for Crimson, some business stuff. And he was out there when Steve was out there, and he went to a gig, and the record company said, "Oh, at the end of the gig, will you present Steve with this gold or silver disc or whatever it was for the sale?" And he came back and he said to Robert, "I saw this. It was extraordinary. You know, he was playing this old Genesis music, but doing it really authentically, and there's such a love for that music." And Robert then thought, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if there was a band that had the same sense of authenticity doing the older Crimson music?"
Sure.
And then we got a call. So we went for a meeting down at the office, and it was Gavin, Mel, John Wetton and myself. But with Robert kind of, you know, pulling the strings and suggesting what we do.
Was it just meetings, or did you have a chance to eventually get together?
No, we met we after that meeting, I think we met up another couple of times, and we started recording some stuff, rehearsed a bit.
Did you play any old tunes with Wetton?
Yeah, I think we did. What were we? We were in the middle of recording. It might have been Fallen Angel, I think it was.
Okay. And was the plan for him to be the lead vocalist, or?
Oh yes, that was made very clear by John that I was not going to be singing. I was just the guitar player.
Okay.
That's okay. And I knew John very well. We got on very well. He was a great guy.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think Robert suddenly thought, "Oh, I'd quite like to do this myself."
Right.
And then next thing you know, we all get a call, apart from poor old John, who suddenly wasn't in Crimson. I know that there was a bit of an issue with, as I remember it, I think there was a bit of an issue with his manager, because his manager phoned up and said, instead of calling it Crimson DNA, can't we call it John Wetton's King Crimson? At which point Robert
Yeah.
drew the whole thing, I think.
Yeah.
That's my memory. That may not be true. That's my memory.
Okay. Well, am I right that we have about 10 minutes and then you need to get to soccer?
Well, not really, because I played football on Tuesday. Okay. And I've sustained an injury, so I'll be going down to see the lads after the game for a drink, but I won't actually be playing because I've damaged my foot.
Okay, well, I hope it's getting better.
So do I. Tonight was the first Thursday night game in 6 months because of the whole COVID thing, so I'm very, very annoyed that I'm not going to be playing tonight.
Oh, I can imagine. Well, hopefully you'll be back in there really quickly.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I guess that leaves us a little more extra time to go into a few other subjects. And
yeah, okay.
Yeah, you know, what are some of your first musical memories and the music that you loved before you could even go buy a record of your own?
Well, I guess it was my adopted mother was French. She used to play Edith Piaf in the house and Georges Brassens. And I think she had some Sacha Distel records. And do you know who he is?
No.
He's a French crooner, but he used to play jazz guitar.
Oh, okay.
And he was quite good. And my dad had some pretty eclectic taste. So I guess the Beatles when I was very young. I think I got given a Beatles record as a present, a single. But then, you know, that kind of late 60s thing, it all kind of exploded. And, you know, we had that game, you know, what's the first single you bought with your own money? And I'm always very proud to say I bought Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix instead of something by Burl Ives, you know.
Excellent. Yes.
And I had a next door neighbor, Chris, who was a couple of years older than me. And of course, when you're that young, that's quite significant. And he had access to all this music. So all of the early things I listened to were as a result of him. And an early guitar hero of mine as a result was a guy called Terry Kath.
Oh, yeah. I love the early Chicago.
Yeah, yeah. So that may have been the first album I ever bought, I think, was Transit Authority.
The very first one. Yeah, I have.
The very first one.
I was going to say, my brother is actually 16 years my senior, so he was bringing home these records when they were new. So some of my earliest memories are hearing Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And, you know, I always loved that horn sound.
Brilliant. Great arrangements and stuff.
Absolutely. You know.
So, yeah, and then I remember once he I don't know if you had them in America. We had these things called samplers, you know, which were a record company would put out a cheap album which had a track, separate tracks from different acts on their label.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And there was one called Nice Enough to Eat, which was Island Records, and there was Jethro Tull was on there, and of course King Crimson, and they played. It was Schizoid Man, and my mate played me Schizoid Man. It just blew me away, you know.
Oh,
absolutely, okay. I thought this. Even at that young age, I could tell it was coming from a different place to all the other music, you know.
Absolutely.
And then we saw them live the following year.
Oh, wow.
I was 13.
Yeah. Have you heard the story about John Anderson and Chris Squire going and seeing them and going, we got to practice a lot more?
Yeah. Well, I think Bill was very, it was also a big fan. He saw them at the Marquee and said, you know, that's the level, that's the standard. We got to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. They said everybody's scurrying back to the woodshed, so to speak.
Yeah.
And what was the first album you remember buying with your own money?
Well, I think that would have been Chicago Transit Authority.
Yeah, Chicago. Okay.
Wake of Poseidon, I think, was an early one as well. Because I couldn't find that they didn't have Caught the Crimson King in my local shop, but they did have that, so I bought that.
Okay.
So I'm very fond of that because it was the first one, and of course I played it to death. And
yeah, I think I actually preferred that a hair over the debut.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I did too, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the beginnings of my collection.
What was your first really good guitar that you had?
Well, I had my dad built me a guitar. My dad was a carpenter. My Polish adopted father was.
Sounds rather Brian May-esque. You know, remember he built his with his dad.
Yeah, kind of. Except my dad copied the neck off of an acoustic guitar. So it had those the holes, you know, with the tuning pegs in, like an acoustic. And what I wanted was a flying V, and I drew it on a piece of paper, but I put lines down as if to say this is how long it's meant to be. And when he made it, he didn't cut the V out, so it was a solid. It's like a heavy metal balalaika. It was like a big solid.
Oh wow! Okay.
So, and we got a pickup from the local music shop, and then I bought a Jedson, which is this very cheap Telecaster copy, and then I went to London and bought a 345 copy, and I used that right up until I was about 16, and I had a band that entered this competition that was run by the Melody Maker, which was a big music paper in England. Mm-hmm. And we somehow, much to my amazement, got through to the final because it was countrywide, you know, Scotland, Northern Ireland, everywhere, and we ended up in the final. And we were approached by Yamaha, and they gave me a Yamaha SG, which I played for ages. That was kind of my first proper guitar, I think, first serious guitar.
I see a couple of them back there now. The white one.
That reminds me. I've got a 61 reissue as a Les Paul. There's this beautiful, I don't know if you can see it on the wall. You probably can't. No.
The white one?
No, it's next to the white one, and you can't see it. And it's a guitar I picked up in Amsterdam a few years back, and I'd never seen one in the flesh before. It's a Gibson 150D. So it looks like, if anyone watching this knows about Gibsons, it looks like a 335 from the front, but when you look at it sideways, it's as wide as a 175. So it's really cool. And I'd seen pictures of them, but I'd never actually seen one. And we had a day off. We were playing in Amsterdam, and we had a day off. And I went to the Rijksmuseum. I got up early and did a whole kind of cultural day. But I walked past a music shop, and they're a rarity these days. It used to be part of the fun of touring, was getting into a new town and finding out where the guitar shop was.
Sure.
So I went in there on the way back, and they had some amazing guitars in a glass case, including that one. And I got my mobile out and phoned my guitar tech and said, if I buy a guitar, is there going to be room in one of the flight cases? And he went, yeah, all right. And I took it to the next sound check, and Robert said, oh, that's lovely. Why don't you try and play that on something? So I now play it on islands, and I use it on the Lizard Suite when we do that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I recall seeing you play something other than just a Paul Reed, depending on the song. The white SG reminds me a bit of Allan Holdsworth with Soft Machine.
Of course. That's that. I saw Allan playing with Soft Machine at the Rainbow. So I'd never heard of him. In fact, the only reason I wanted to see him play was that I'd read an article where Robert said, you know, the only guitarist in England worth listening to is Allan Holdsworth. I'd never heard of him.
Wow, I wonder what John McLaughlin thought of that.
John McLaughlin wasn't living in England at the time.
Oh, okay. So it was
because I know Robert's a big fan of John McLaughlin and cites him as a big influence. I know he does. But I think it was to do with, you know, who was there at the time.
Sure.
And yes, he was playing a white SG, and
yeah, there's some great footage on YouTube. And it's interesting. It seems like his style changed quite a bit by the time the 80s came around. It's like he was a lot more alternate picking. Like, you know, if people talk about him as being this legato player, and he definitely was, but, you know, would you say that his style kind of changed a bit to a more legato approach?
He was forever pushing the boundaries. He was forever pushing himself, both sonically and musically. He was forever disappointed with what he did. He thought every gig was the worst gig he'd done, you know, and that's what made him a genius, and also what made him infuriating. I think is that it's funny how, you know, sometimes those qualities are the same thing. You know, you take the raw passion and irritability out of John McEnroe, and you don't have the same player. You know what I mean? It's that. Sure. Quite often those qualities are the same thing. You know? But I got to know Allan. I phoned him up when I was a teenager.
Yeah, I love that story. If you could retell it.
Well, I never did many normal jobs, but in the 1 year after I left school, I did several. One of which was working in this record shop, and an album by Gong came out, and I could see Allan Holdsworth was on it.
Yeah.
So I phoned up. Alan's from a place in the north of England called Bradford. And so I phoned up the record label, and I put on an accent, a Bradford accent. And I lied, and I said, I'm an old friend of Allan Holdsworth's, and I see he's on your label currently with Gong.
Can you do a bit of the Bradford accent for us?
Well, it talks like that. I mean, obviously Alan's accent became a bit more slightly slurred because he lived in America for so long, but that's kind of how they talk.
Okay.
And I said, I'm an old friend of Alan's from Bradford. You don't have a contact number for him, do you? And they said yes, and they gave me his number. So I just phoned him up, and I said, "Oh, I'm a young guitarist. Do you give lessons?" He went, "No, man, no. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't give lessons." And then, much to my utter amazement, he said, "You can come round if you like." I went, "Really?" So for weeks, I say weeks. This is a long time ago. And I don't know if my memory's playing tricks on me, but in my head, I used to go to his house every Thursday for months. It probably wasn't. Maybe it was 3 or 4 times, but he was incredibly nice to me. And he taught me lots of stuff. He taught me a lot of stuff about sound. I remember him talking to me about compression and then putting different records on, saying, "Can you hear that? Can you hear that?" And he used to get his soldering iron out, and he was, you know, he'd be in the back of guitars and messing with pickups and messing with amps and trying. So he taught me a lot about those things. And then I would play some chords and he'd solo over the top, and I got to see that really close up, and it was fucking mad.
What did you glean from that? Did you figure out any of what he was doing, or?
No, not really. I mean, you know, he was so extraordinary. You know, I tried to go down that route, but, you know, I mean, no one can play like him, not really. Yeah. No. And if they do, it's because they're copying him. And it's better to be influenced by somebody than copy them, I think. So, you know, there's elements of what I do that have some of what he did, but you know, I could never play like him.
I can hear some of his influence in your playing.
Yeah, but he was a unique one-off, absolutely the most underrated guitar player in history, because he was incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Out of the different groups he was in and guest spots and such, what are some of your favorites?
Well, I'm afraid it is the earlier stuff, the Tony Williams Lifetime.
Oh yeah, Believe It. Yeah, that's
Believe It's
amazing.
great. And there's a Jean-Luc Ponty album called Enigmatic Oceans. He plays great on that. And I loved him in UK. I thought that I loved some of the stuff on that album.
Oh yeah, I love that album.
It's brilliant. Later on, it got so intense. I found it was too dense for me. So I loved it when I could hear him play in space, and you just got to hear, you know, his tone, his phrasing, tiny little things, tiny little tweaks he would do, little dips and really subtle things. You know, one of the joys of the remixing stuff that I did was I got to remix the first two Bruford albums, and
yeah,
so I got to hear all that stuff. It's just amazing, amazing, hearing it in its raw form. You know, isolated, just in a room.
Oh wow,
yeah. It's amazing. And so he was always very pally to me, apart from when I got the job with Level 42. And
yeah, you had taken his place, and he was filling in for the original guitarist who was passed away. No,
yeah, he wasn't the original guitarist. The original guitarist was a guy called Boone, and Boone left, and they replaced him with Al Murphy, who was a very, very good musician. And Al died, and when Al died, because Gary Husband was playing drums for Level 42, Gary said, "Oh, maybe Alan would do it." And Mark King thought, "Well, he's never going to play for us," and he did. And in fact, I went twice. They did a run of 15 shows at Hammersmith Odeon, and I went to 2 of them. And it was weird seeing him in that context. And of course, he didn't want to go down the front, so he was at the back, and the brass section were down the front. And there was a lot of things he refused to play open strings or rhythm. And of course, it's, you know, Level 42 fundamentally were a funk group, but Al wouldn't play. He wouldn't play any rhythm. So as brilliant as he was, and he was brilliant in that context, the playing was incredible. But I think Mark wanted something, you know, a mixture really.
Sure.
And when he offered me the job, and I found out months later, well, years later, I think, one day Mark told me, he said, "You know, the day I offered you the job," I said, "Yeah." He said, "I had to phone Allan Holdsworth up and say, you know, thanks ever so much for helping us out, but we've got a new guy." Right. And apparently Alan was really upset. "Oh, man, I thought that was my gig." And so when he found out it was me, the 16-year-old that used to go around to his house, and the next time I saw him, he was a little bit off with me. And he said, "I know why they fired me." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I look like fucking Methuselah," is what he said. So, but then, bizarrely, in 2014, Crimson played a run of shows in Times Square, the Nokia, or I don't know, they keep changing the name, but
yeah.
And the last night coincided with Alan playing at the Iridium on Broadway. And so we went down, and I've got a couple of really lovely pictures that Tony Levin took of me and Alan together, with his arm around me, and him really bigging me up to his acolytes, you know, and with no justification, as I made clear at the time. I remember saying to these people, "He's lying. I'm not, compared to Alan, I'm like a beginner with no strings on my guitar." So, but it was a lovely moment. It was the last time I saw him.
Well, I'm glad you guys got a chance to go.
Yeah, they're 2 lovely pictures that I cherish. They're great.
Oh yeah. Well, he's one of a kind, superlative, and you know, and he left behind quite a body of work, you know. So there's a lot to enjoy and be inspired by. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So who have you yet met that you would love to work with, that you've been a fan of for years?
Well, there's a couple of people I have met, but I haven't worked with them, which I guess would be Pete Gabriel and Kate Bush. I met Kate. Kate's been to 3 Crimson shows, and
nice.
The last one she came to, she came looking for me afterwards, and we had quite a long chat. She was incredibly nice and incredibly complimentary, and it was a real highlight for me. It meant a great deal to me. I'm such a fan of hers.
Did you catch any of her reunion shows?
No, because we were playing. That was when we first started playing with Crimson, so we weren't in the country.
Okay.
I know my friend Danny Thompson went, because Danny's played on several of her albums.
Yeah, that was so unexpected to see her surface after so many years.
And of course, John Giblin, who plays on my album, was the bass player for those run of shows.
Oh, that's awesome.
Hammersmith.
It's a shame no DVD ever surfaced of that because
it was filmed.
Yeah, so who knows? Maybe someday.
Don't know. There was obviously something about it she didn't like.
Yeah.
Because she scuppered it because it was. I know it was filmed for that very reason.
Well, I noticed the live album came out, but it was just audio, so I guess there must have been some reasoning behind it. But I heard that the production was really stunning. You know, state of the art. You know, so and I wouldn't expect anything less from her. She was always cutting edge, so you know,
absolutely
would expect
absolutely.
That. Any memories of any of the other obvious progressive rock groups? Were you much of a Yes fan at all, or?
Well, I think Yes were the second band I ever saw.
Oh yeah, what year would you say that was?
It was 1971.
Okay, so like Yes album Steve Howe had just joined, or was it?
No, it was the Yes album was the most recent album, but Rick Wakeman had joined, so Rick Wakeman was playing.
Okay, so just on the.
So it was before Fragile.
Okay.
And I saw them locally, just up the road here from where I live now. Yes, I saw them. As I say, I saw Genesis a lot of times.
How about Emerson, Lake and Palmer?
I saw them once, only once. I saw them at a big show at the Oval, which is a cricket ground in South London, and it was a poll winners concert. So they were headlining. Genesis were on, Focus were on, Argent, an Irish group called Froop were on. Froop, yeah. I think Ian MacDonald produced one of their albums. Jack Bruce was on.
Love Jack Bruce.
Yeah.
Excellent. That sounds like a heck of a bill.
Yeah, well, those were, you don't realize at the time, but they were extraordinary days, and an extraordinary time to be that age and consuming all of that kind of music. It was amazing.
You had mentioned that you came to Arkansas to meet your siblings. Is that right?
Yeah.
What was that the first time you'd ever been to America?
No.
No.
I've been to New York and I've been to LA. So it's only when you go to somewhere like Arkansas you get more of an overview of what the country's like or can be like.
Did that feel like a bit of culture shock?
That's something of an understatement. Yeah.
I bet. Yeah. Well, my mother's from Arkansas, so I've been there myself.
Well, listen, I come from
I'm in no hurry to go back.
No, well, I come from a very liberal-minded, artistic upbringing. I worked in the theatre. I was in the National Youth Theatre. I worked as an actor. I experienced all sorts of different kind of avant-garde plays and music, and consumed it all with relish. And then you go to somewhere like Arkansas,
right.
Which and to be fair, I guess I must have gone there in about '83, and I guess the civil rights movement and any subsequent legislation didn't take place till the end of the '60s. So when I was there, I guess it was less than 20 years since. And you know what? You can change the legislation as much as you like, but it's very tough to change what's in people's heads, I guess.
That's true, and that's obviously playing out today as well.
I think it is, yeah. It's part of it, definitely.
So much time has passed, but so little progress has been made on human rights front, which is a shame. Is it Robert?
No, I would have told you if it was Robert. I'd have said, oh, look, it's Robert.
So I was curious about your thoughts about, I know Robert always bristles at the prog rock tag as if it's kind of a prison that King Crimson has wanted to escape from. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I kind of know what he means. I mean, on a personal level, I'm happy to be labelled anything. I don't care really.
Well, as long as they're talking about you, I figure it's better than the day when they stop talking.
Yeah. I mean, Robert, I know what he means. I think he's it feels that you're kind of grouped in with a kind of cliched or a very generalized idea of what that means. But I would say, as someone that's old enough to have grown up with that music, actually, the bands that I liked, you couldn't really mistake one for the other. They were so different. You know, Gentle Giant with the whole Elizabethan thing, and Yes, Crimson, you know, they were very, very different.
Oh,
very
yeah,
different.
definitely.
It wasn't like country and western, where it has you know, there are certain thematic things, certain musical things that single it out as that. And ultimately, you know, at the time it wasn't called progressive. At the time it was called rock music or underground music. I think
art rock.
So the prog epithet kind of came later. And even then, you know, what did it mean? It kind of meant we're screwing with the form, we're developing ideas, we're not just sticking to verse, chorus. Right. That's all it meant.
No commercial considerations.
No, not really. And I think it became a rather cheap journalistic label. And it had this cliche of, you know, it's all about goblins and it's this, that, and the other. And you think, well, really?
Really very little if it was. I'd say heavy metal is more about fantasy than...
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, all those bands were so different. Van der Graaf Generator, you couldn't compare them to any other group, really. They, you know.
No, it just seems.
And yet they were all crammed together. I think what muddies the water slightly, and this is an observation. It's not meant as a criticism, but those bands, their individual influences were very disparate, you know. And what they came up with was what they came up with as a result of combining all of that stuff. Whereas more modern groups that are grouped in that classification are actually referring to those bands. Do you know what I mean? So
I agree. And it's like,
so they're referencing those bands, whereas those bands weren't really referencing anything.
Right, exactly. And it's like kind of a secondhand emulation with more recent keyboard and engineering, you know. And I don't want that, you know. It's like, here's the thing, it's like, as much as I love those albums from the bands that are the bedrock of this genre, I can only listen to the same 100 records so many times and talk about them. And after about 10 years, you know, there's nothing left to say. And, you know, the nature of online discussions when it comes to progressive rock goes in a circle, you know, and, you know, there's always new generations coming along that are discovering it. So it never really, you know, the discussions never really wind down. But for someone that's been talking about it and enjoying it, you know, for, you know, 20 or 30 years.
There's a lot of genuinely good and interesting music out there. My son is it's just turned 18. And he's forever playing me things I've never heard of by these young bands who, I mean, I have no idea how they earn a living. I can't believe that they do. But some of the stuff that he's played me is genuinely fantastic and interesting and intriguing and musical. Amazing. There's some really interesting things out there. And but they're not following that thing. You know, they're coming up with something new.
Right,
Who and they're pushing the boundaries. But I don't think, oh yeah, that sounds like whatever from the early 70s. It doesn't sound like that at all. It's completely unique.
Well, that's good. You know, it seems like they're embracing the true meaning of progression, you know. Yeah. You know. Yeah, well, I interviewed Bill Bruford, gosh, about 10 years ago now, and we kind of discussed the same thing. And he said, basically, fusion became a derogatory term, as did progressive rock, ambient, minimalism, and every other genre when the pioneers have moved on.
Yeah,
you know, I think that sums it up pretty well. Yes. Okay, well, I guess we should probably wrap it up pretty soon. I was curious, what are some of your favorite tunes to perform on stage with Crimson? Are there any moments where everything just kicks in and the hair on your arms just stands up?
Yeah, well, they change, I think. Performing Epitaph in Hiroshima,
oh, wow.
literally a minute away from where the bomb dropped. That was a moment. Singing Peace unaccompanied in a large venue is an extraordinary thing to be able to do. I love singing Islands. I was a big fan of Boz. I think he's a much maligned singer. I thought he was a great singer, Boz. So I love doing those era tunes. Easy Money's always great because Easy Money's always different in the middle, and we never really know where it's going to go. And so that's always.
How much freedom do you have to improvise in any given time?
It depends. There are some tunes where there's gaps for you to do that, and there's other tunes where it's absolutely interlocked and you can't do that. And as I say, you know, something like Easy Money, that we know how the song starts, we know how it ends. In the middle, it's anyone's guess, you know. And some nights it goes places that you don't expect it to. Some nights it follows a similar trend. Others it goes way off, you know. And that's an exciting thing to do in a large arena, I think.
Do you find it's harder to improvise with an ensemble this size versus, say, a quartet?
Well, I think this ensemble is very sensitive to that, actually. And I think they know, you know, to stand back and when to, and Robert will nod approval. Robert will say, go on, you know, you go. I've had that from him where, you know, I've played a little bit and I've looked over and he said, she's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know that, you know, improv has always been a big part of the Crimson experience. So, you know, I think the fans always look forward to that jumping off point.
Yeah.
And seeing where it leads. So, yeah. So, what's next for you?
For me, well, I don't know. I mean, this year was going to be an interesting year, and of course, it's all been kiboshed, as indeed as most people's. But so my plan this year was to finish the solo record in January, and then in February, I was working on a thing. I did 3 commissions for the BBC over the years. Radio 3 in England on the BBC is a station that plays classical orchestral music and plays avant-garde and, you know, new music. And I've been commissioned by them 3 times and done 3 pieces which utilize speech as part of the composition. And the first thing I did was an award-nominated thing, and it got the best reviews I've ever had, really. And it was called The Road to Ballina, and it uses interviews of my Polish adoptive father and my French mother. But I also went back to Ireland and found all these people that knew my mum, and the band leader that she sang for was still alive when I did it.
Wow.
And it's all put together with a narrative, but using speech as part of the composition. So sometimes bits of speech are repeated, or an orchestral instrument will double the pitch and the rhythm. So I did that years ago, and a friend of mine is a guy called Richard Turner, who has done all the out front visuals for Roger Waters for the past 15 years. And he loves that piece, and he always said, I think we could do a live version of this using film and video. And so in February, I was going to work on that. I was going to do a one-man show, and I was going to do it at the Edinburgh Festival in August. And it was going to be directed by Michael Attenborough, who was Richard Attenborough's son, but he's very successful as a director in his own right. He used to be artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. So that was a kind of, you know, serious, scary departure. So when the Edinburgh Festival got cancelled, I was both very disappointed and incredibly relieved, because it was a scary thing, but a scary in a good way. You know, it's good to throw yourself into something completely unknown, really.
Sure.
So I'm guessing I would like to try and revive that, but I don't know if I can do that next year, because who knows if it will be on. All the Crimson dates have been rescheduled for the same time next year. And there's talk of other dates at the end of the year. And I was hoping in February to do some live stuff for me, to promote this out, you know, as a result of this album. So all those plans are now blowing in the wind, my friend. So So who knows? So other than that, it's just recording projects, yeah, I mean, you know, I've signed a 3-album deal, so I need to get on and write stuff too, I guess. So.
Absolutely. What can you tell me about that Crimson documentary, the Crimson FUCK, I think it's called? Yeah.
Cosmic Fuck, yeah.
Cosmic, yes, that's it.
Well, I thought it was completed earlier on in the year, and so did Toby, who directed it. But then he went up to see Robert, and then Robert decided to give him these 2 long interviews, which Toby is now trying to integrate. The trouble is, you put stuff in, you've got to take stuff out. So in Toby's head, it was finished. I haven't seen any of it. I've seen a couple of clips. Some of it's very unusual and not like a standard documentary at all. So I don't think people should expect a standard MTV Sky type rockumentary, because it won't be that.
Where you start at the beginning and tell the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, I know they did interview some of the previous members, but it's mostly about the current band. He was on the road with us for about 18 months.
Okay.
So we're also very nervous about what he may have filmed that we have yet to see. Did we say anything indiscreet? I did say to him, am I going to get the sack when this is shown to Robert? He assured me not.
Is there any live footage included in it as well?
Well, I tell you what there is. There's we did a specially recorded thing where we all set up in the round, and we did a whole set, and it's all beautifully filmed. So it's kind of like a live thing, except we're not on stage. We're in the round, and it's very intimate. And I think there'll be clips of that in the documentary. But I think I was talking to the management the other day, and I think that might come out as a separate thing. I don't know if it will come out as an extra, or whether it will come out of a thing of its own, because it's at least an hour long. And it's this beautifully shot thing where we're all in the round together instead of.
Where did you film that at?
We filmed it very near here, actually. It's a beautiful little theatre up the road here, and we did it there.
It's an interesting angle. I mean, the in the round thing, you know, obviously Yes did it quite a bit, but Crimson, that's a first, I believe.
Yeah, well, when I say in the round, I mean we were all facing each other.
Okay.
Right, in a space, and there are cameras everywhere, kind of, you know. So it's quite an intimate thing. It's not up on a stage. You're kind of in the middle of it.
Okay.
So it's not in the round in that sense.
Not on a round stage like a Leslie Susan.
We are in the round looking at each other. So, you know, there's drums over there and there's people here, and so we're not in a line. We're kind of. I haven't seen that, but apparently it looks beautiful. So I haven't seen that either.
Are there any Crimson tunes you'd like to dust off that you haven't got to yet?
Yeah, I think did I mention this earlier? I'm getting confused now. We were going to do Book of Saturday.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do Wake of Poseidon, because I love that, and I know Robert loves the middle section, but it's the words he has a problem with.
Update them a bit.
Sorry?
Maybe update them a little bit.
Well, I guess there's always that. Yeah, I don't really like doing that.
I really want to tamper with
it because they're pieces of their time. I mean, yeah, he made me rewrite the lyrics to Easy Money.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. Yes, those are a couple of the things. I mean, we were doing like virtually all of side 2 of Lizard, which I loved doing that.
Oh, that was beautiful. Yeah.
Did you see us do that?
Yes, I did. And
yeah.
Never would have expected.
No, and it's really exciting. I thought it was a real tour de force. I loved playing that. But that seems to have dropped off the set list more recently. But maybe it will come back. Who knows?
Well, you've uncovered so many wonderful nuggets, and I just think the timing of this lineup was right. You know, I mean, I loved what Adrian did with the band, but you know, 30 years of being with the band, you know, it's like, you know, let's see what new things occur if you shake the lineup a bit. You know.
Yeah. Well, it was 30 years, but you know,
sporadically.
There was an awful lot of gaps in that. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you squeeze it all together. It's
yeah, you know,
probably not dissimilar time to the time we've been.
I think a lot of us were just craving to hear some of the older material, you know. So I remember saying 10 years ago, bring back the woodwinds, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's.
Oh yeah, well, it's great to have Mel in the band, isn't it? Fantastic.
Yeah, he's so amazing.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite venues to play?
Oh, okay. Well, God, we've played. There's been a few amazing places. We played. We did 2 nights at the ancient amphitheater in Pompeii.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask about that. You know, you were the first ones to play there since Pink Floyd in 1971, right?
Yeah, it was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, walking down that arch, the stone arch that's, you know, thousands of years old, and into the most extraordinary night sky and this crowd. That was a hair on the arms moment. That was amazing. Last year we played the arena in Verona, which I think is the largest Roman amphitheater still in use. So it's not as big as the Colosseum, but the Colosseum isn't used for shows anymore. That was pretty amazing too, for similar reasons, but and it's much, much bigger. And then we did 3 nights at the Albert Hall. I mean, that's a wonderful venue to play. And then we sold out Radio City Music Hall, and that was a real buzz. I loved that. Such an amazing venue, and I've been to shows there, so to actually play there is a real bucket list moment. Okay. And then we went down to South America, and we played the Sunset Stage at Rock in Rio.
Yeah, I think I've seen
about 120,000 people. Yeah. No, that's all been filmed. They're talking about releasing that as well.
And it keeps slipping up on YouTube, but it gets taken down.
Yeah. Well, we've got all the tapes, so I know they're thinking of releasing that.
Yeah, I would. Yeah,
but that was mad, man. You know, you look out that sea of people, and they all seem to know the words, and they're all singing back at you, and it was insane. So that was a highlight. And then actually the last 2 shows were great. We played at this place called the Movie Star Arena in Santiago. And we sold out 2 nights. There's 12,000 people. It's extraordinary. Lots of young people too, you know, not the cliched audience that you
typical bespectacled, balding, middle-aged men.
Yeah. They're all on stage.
Which I am. So,
yeah.
Yes.
So we played some amazing places. The beautiful, ornate, tiny, really, theatre in Monte Carlo. I've been very fortunate. It's been amazing.
Does the fact that you use the in-ears kind of give a certain consistency no matter where you go?
Well, yeah, kind of. You can still hear the hall, in a negative way. If it's a very lively hall and it's loud, sometimes you can't cut it out completely, and that can screw up your tuning. And I mean, I'm not a fan of the in-ears. It does kind of cut you off from the experience. Some nights you think we're going down really badly here, and the out front guy goes, "You mad? They're going crazy," you know. But you don't get a sense of it because you cut off. So no, I'm not a big fan of it, but it's a necessity. And you've got control. We've got our own mixers, so we make our own monitor mixes.
Do you ever?
There's no one to blame anymore.
Do you ever tweak the monitor mix during the show?
I have. Yes, I do. I have a very weird mix. The mix that I have is to enable me to get through the show rather than a nice listening experience.
So you don't have everybody piped into your mix?
No. I quite often turn people off because I need to concentrate on what I'm doing, and it's a pitching thing.
Sure.
I quite often have Mel very quiet because he's playing when I'm singing, and I need clarity. I need to be able to hit the pitch, and so I quite often, in some numbers, I turn people up and turn people off, and yeah.
Did you have to in order to get your guitar tone to mesh with Robert's, did you have to do anything in particular when it came to making your patches and such, or?
Well, not really. I think, you know, I try to make them complementary to him, or indeed imitate him if we're doing like Sailor's Tale, you know. So I'm using the modeling to try and recreate what he did, what he had at the time, you know.
Sure.
Fuzzbox through a high watt.
Exactly. What a glorious sound.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried Robert's tuning?
No.
No.
No. It's hard enough playing in this tuning without going down that particular avenue.
I hear you. Well, I think I've tried it a couple times. I had a progressive rock night I put on at a little theater here in Atlanta each year with local talent. And one year we were going to do Vroom. So we gave it a try, and it's like you got to go get a special set of strings just to do it for sure.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well,
all right, man.
Thank you so much. Everybody, the new album is coming out October 23rd on Inside Out Records. It's Secrets and Lies. I think every Crimson fan would love it, and a lot more than that. So
yeah. And the video for The Trouble with Angels is on YouTube, and it's got Gavin and Tony Levin playing. Tony Levin's bass playing on that is absolutely stunning. So, you know,
your son's bass playing is really awesome too.
Yeah, he's great. He's great.
Tony.
I was, he kept saying, "Can I play on this record?" And I went, "Yeah, all right." And I deliberately gave him a difficult tune to play. And he came in the next day and he played it all the way through. He copped all the time changes, everything. Amazing.
Yeah, quite impressive. Is he mainly a bass player, or does he play guitar?
Yeah, he plays guitar too. He plays a bit of everything. He's primarily a bass player, but yeah, he plays everything.
Django, and he's the one that was in the video for Scarcity of Miracles.
That's right. Yeah, that was yet another attempt at me trying to get out of being in a video. Let's get my son he can learn the lyrics. He can sing them. Yeah. Yeah,
that was great.
Yeah.
Well, Jakko, thank you so much. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope we can catch up again sometime down the road. And please give my best to Robert and the gang.
I will.
It's been a real pleasure. All right, y'all take care. Come back Saturday night. We will be looking back on the late, great Kevin Gilbert, one of the 90s progressive music stars that gave us a lot and could have given us a lot more. So
yeah, brilliant. I'm a big fan myself. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Bye. It's been a pleasure. All right. Take care.